Welcome back to Horrors Untold. In this episode, we talk to Maggie Ryel, the graphic designer who helped us transform a tangled web of lore, puzzles, and haunt history into a physical book that actually makes sense, most of the time. Maggie didn't just lay out the pages, she inhabited the voices of our fictional writers, obsessed over margins and handwriting styles, and helped breathe eerie analog life into every layer of this project. If you've ever wondered what it takes to design madness, or how much white space is too much, you'll find your answer here. Let's get into part one.
Okay, let's start with your name, please.
Maggie Ryel.
Ryle. I actually didn't know that. Ryle. I always just called you Maggie Reel, I guess, in my head.
Yeah, it's pronounced a lot of different ways, but it's Ryel.
What is the normal title that you give yourself?
Graphic designer would be what my normal title I would say would be, um, which is kind of an all-encompassing term as itself.
I always refer to you as the page layout designer. Is that a real name or is that something I made up?
That that is a real name. There are people who specialize in that. That's one facet of things that I do, and that's specifically what I did here for the book. So that's fair, I think.
I think your job responsibilities kind of bled over into a lot of other adjacent areas than just page layout design. But yeah, I think it's mostly fair too.
Yeah, yeah.
Speaking of that, what exactly did you do for Horrors Untold?
In the simplest forms, from the page layout designer perspective, I just took the content and organized it into the format of the book, basically. But like more specifically, I did things like find typefaces and fonts to use, work through the sizing and margins and the structure of that physical stuff, created some certain rules where content could live within, so we have some consistency, find different styles for chapter titles and the body copy, things like that. Basically, build it into a physical form.
I think that's an accurate description. I also think that kind of undersells what you did. Our many, many hours of conversations that we had over the course of, God, a year at least.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there will be questions you'll end up asking me that'll kind of unfold that information. But yeah, there was a lot that went into it for sure.
I think what really, it took me a while to notice, and what impressed me the most about how you approached this project specifically was I felt like you were an actor. You were kind of taking the persona of the different characters that we have in the book, the people who put the book together and they do they write on the margins or whatever else. You really did approach it like it was almost like method acting. Like, okay, if I were this person and I had my hands on the book at this time, how would I put this here and there? And that really once you have that revelation, it really shines through across, I think, every single inch of every page.
Yeah, I guess that's probably a good way to describe it. I was kind of like an actor. I did kind of put myself into the headspace of not only like you guys as being writers, but also what would that character do or how would they do this thing or write this way or whatever. But yeah, I did kind of put myself into that headspace to lay things out. So for instance, like the writer who writes in red pen has a little tinge of an angle to some of their lines where, they're not writing in a perfect straight line. It sort of trails off a little bit sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes. And then maybe they try to like recorrect themselves or whatever. But that's something that like I do as a person writing. So we wanted to make sure that it was kind of organic in that way. And yeah, so I kind of put myself as an actor in a sense, I guess, to come up with stuff like that so that it kind of looked realistic and it, kind of didn't feel caged or something of that nature.
Right. And that isn't normally something you would do for a more traditional book, right?
No, not really. Because most traditional books, you don't have a lot of margin writing and you don't have as much going on. You don't have as many fonts going, different ways and that sort of thing. So, in I guess you could say a traditional typical book, it's more just kind of laying out the content as it stands, and you don't really have to think through that stuff as much. Um, so yeah. for sure.
How long would you say it takes you to put together a normal book?
Hmm, it's a good question. That varies based on so many things. So, how long the book is, how invested the author or the other person is in what they want it to look like versus if they just kind of don't really have much of an idea. There's a process of going back and forth of like, what does the structure look like of what do you have in mind for the visuals of that? So, from a timing perspective, in an hour's world, I guess it could be anywhere from if I've done it plenty of times, it could be 10 hours to, more than that, 20, 50, 80. It just depends on how involved it is. This project was hundreds of hours. This project was a lot more complex, and there was a lot of layers, and we had a lot of conversations to for me to kind of fully understand what the intent was for the different pieces, for the different characters, for the different um, sections, even to really get to the root of it. Because every section is almost like a little mini book in itself. It's all different visually and also different content, different styles of content. So
And it's not something that we were able to do linearly where we start on page one and go to page 320. We had to keep going back at it in different waves because we had to wait for the gameplay to be designed and the riddles to be inserted and all that fun stuff.
yes, the amount of layers of this book is ridiculous in a sense. It's not a knock, but it's something that's not something you think about really. When you look at it now as a finished book, you can see that. You can see that there was a lot of effort, there was a lot of writing, there was a lot of designing, there was a lot of elements. But we started from scratch with zero, so we didn't know what it was gonna look like or where things were gonna go. So I would say on my side, it took me like a year to really wrap my brain even around what in the world are we doing here. Um, you have described it to me, Mark, as six different times, and I'm still like, wait a minute, what? Still trying to figure out where some of this was going. So, that beginning process, we didn't lay anything out. We didn't do anything really, except for think through and talk through how certain things would go. And then, yeah, once we started laying it out, it wasn't an easy, like, start from A, this is a finished manuscript, completely start from A and go to B and you're done. It was kind of like, here's a section, we're still working through some concepts, or we're still working through some things, or we got puzzles that are coming to, so it was like laying out chunks and then kind of going back and revisiting things, which for me it was a bit of a challenge in that respect because I'm a more organized path mannered person. So I like to have as much figured out structurally so that I don't have to go back and change things a bunch of times. And we didn't really have to do that a ton, but there was a couple different instances of things where we did have to go back and revisit how that was put together or where things were, um, because things were ever evolving.
Or like when we had to change the size of the book to go up to 7 by 10, for example.
Yes. That was a big one, yeah. So that was one of my things was I wanted to make sure we had some kind of a basis structure to begin with, so we didn't have to do something like that. But as we got into it, with the complexity of how much information goes onto those pages within a page, those kind of scanned in pages, and the size of what that text had to be in order to allow for margin content and people writing in the sides, we had to expand the book size so that it wasn't getting cut off or too close to the edge of the page that it could get cut off or the printer would reject it or something of that nature. So we did make that decision like kind of halfway-ish through, maybe, I guess. Can't remember exactly when it happened, but I know that we had
Yeah,
virtually most of the book laid out or pretty much all the book laid out, and then I just kind of had to go back and touch it all again to fix that. So
an
yeah,
easy process. It didn't take you very long.
it wasn't terribly hard, but it definitely was something I had
Oh
to
no, it was yeah. No, I'm definitely being sarcastic. I definitely got the
being
impression from you it was like a lot of work for sure.
Yeah, I tried to avoid it as much as we could, but it was unavoidable. I think this bigger size of it is better served for the content of the book. I mean,
Yeah.
There are pages where you'll see it feels like it maybe doesn't fill the page enough, but that's intentional because there are other pages where there's margin writing and there's stuff going on and there's almost too much on the page. Not there it's kind of in a good way there's too much on a page and that there's other pages where you can breathe, but the reason for that and the reason maybe a page that doesn't have writing on it that inserted pages on the page, this is a very good glimpse into conversations with Mark and I where we would keep saying things back the same words over and over again to understand what we're talking about, but we fully had to invest in how do we talk about this book because it's so convoluted. But anyway, back to what I was saying, there'd be a page within the page that there's a lot of white space around it. And if we were to make that one bigger, but the page before it was smaller, but it's technically the same scanned page, and the page before it was smaller because there was all this margin writing, then it kind of is jarring to the reader and to anybody going through it. So we kind of tried to keep that streamlined and kind of the same. So at least there's consistency somewhere. That the jarringness, I guess you could say, could come from the book content itself and the writing and the margins and such, than the actual like layout of pages, if that makes sense.
I don't think I ever told you this before, but the way that the pages kind of change shape almost, and the margins around the pages and how much white space there may or may not be, that's definitely part of it. But it kind of reminds me of House of Leaves, which is I lent my copy of that book to you to look through and kind of try to give you an idea of what maybe sorta we were trying to go for. It's one of our many books that we had as inspiration, although that book is really weird. I mean, ours is really weird too. Uh, but it plays with space on a page in a way that we never fully did. But in this way, it does remind me of that, and that kind of makes me chuckle.
Yeah, yeah, we never really got to do that because a lot of the content in here is like from, blog stuff or from a scanned page that went in. So it was just kind of like written on another computer or somewhere else. So it wasn't all like inherently in the book pages like it is in House of Leaves where they got to play with some of that. There's a couple elements where we did get to include some of that stuff, and that comes with some of the
Yeah,
puzzle elements.
yeah.
Um, in that second journal that Marjorie writes, there's some of that element where we got to play with kind of the look of how the type is on the page. Um, so yeah, that was definitely an inspirational book to use for this to kind of guide or give some examples of what it could look like, for sure.
And Marjorie's first journal, where you have to bend the pages you very carefully made shapes. You carved shapes out of the blocks of text,
Yes,
and you
the
have to,
first
yeah.
journal, correct. Yes, not the second. Sorry.
Oh, the second one too. I think both are pretty applicable.
Yeah, they're both pretty. They're wild. They're definitely wild.
Well, speaking of which, I wanted to ask you, you said like you still have problems trying to explain it or understand the concept of the book, which me too. Um, but in conversation since the book has come out, have you ever tried to like explain it to a friend or a different client or someone else? Like how do you manage to do that?
Yes, I did actually just have to describe this to somebody the other day, ironically enough. And I can't tell you how I explained it because I don't remember, but I remember at the end of it, I said to this person that I just explained that book the best I've ever done after 2.5 years. So, it's like and the more you talk about it, the more it kind of flows into something more succinct, I guess. But yeah, it's definitely hard to explain. I really get to the point of it's easier to show it. It's easier to show here's a couple snippets of pages and they kind of go, oh, okay, I understand. But when you try to describe it, there's so many layers. There's so many layers of content. There's so many layers of characters and of storylines and of different things that are going on, the puzzle element, that it's really hard to really get across that amount of what it is.
I remember you specifically mentioning while we were still working on the book, I think it was a client happened to look, maybe it was a friend, I don't know. You happened to look at your monitor and you had some files up and the person was like, "What is that?" And I was so tickled by that interaction because like that really, well, I guess that's what we were going for. We wanted people to be able to pick it up and look at it and go, "Okay, what the hell is this?"
Yeah, yeah, you wanted to be people to be able to like really think about it and dive into it and be intrigued by what it is. It's almost like even if you never wanted to read it, you could own it as something that's just different and something that's unique and has some elements that maybe not every book has. I mean, um, in most of the time when I've showed people things, or yeah, if someone's, I don't remember that specific instance, but um, when I've shown people things, they're kind of like really impressed by the intricacy of it, and definitely blown away by what it is, what it looks like, how and when I describe the storylines of it, um, they're also kind of like, holy cow, like that's a lot. So yeah, it's definitely something that I think people can latch onto for different reasons because of that.
Do you have a favorite page, design element, layout, anything at all?
I don't have a favorite per se because there's so many different parts, but I will say that more of my favorite sections are the ones that were probably the hardest and more challenging to work on because they had so many layers to them that it was like thinking through how do you do this and make it look right and make it look okay. So like for me, the sections that kind of stand out in that way are both of the journals from Marjorie because there's so many, there's puzzles in there, there's layers of, a placed content outside of the this regular book, i.e. a page within a page. And then there's writing on top of that, and then maybe there's other stuff that's also layered. And so the like layers of what's going on in those sections I really do um I do kind of like. And then the other one is also that Christmas book, which I guess is all three real Marjorie related kind of things.
Yeah.
Uh, but those are the ones that had a lot of layers to them. It had a lot of like visual interest on the page once we were done. And you kind of step back and you look at it and you go, wow, like that's kind of wild. There's a lot going on. Specifically, like the Christmas book, the first page. There's a first page of that Christmas book, not that chapter. There's a lot going on in that page. There's like multiple different pen colors and different styles of handwriting and the page that's within the page and all that kind of stuff. Same thing with the journals, the second journal with the like back and forth conversation between two people with his two, so it's two different typefaces being used there, but then there's also like the red pen typeface every now and then on top of it all. But those books, and then there's loose leaf pages inside of that quote book that are typeface are written on a typewriter. So there's like all these different layers that when you step back and you look at it, you go, wow, that just visually is pretty cool. Like it's like a little bit of a look into someone's head, I guess. So those are the ones I'd say would be my kind of my favorite.
Personally speaking, if I may interrupt you here, and be selfish and hog the spotlight, the different colored pen marks that the different color pens that Marjorie uses throughout all of her different chapters that indicates what time period she's in, and the chapters are nonlinear in that sense, and so you can kind of like a detective reconstruct the timeline and the order of events just by looking at the colors. And that's something I remember you and I had to go back and forth on quite a bit too. Like, no, 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 that's the wrong color. It needs to be this color, or should we change it to this color?
Yeah, and not just the color too, but also the style of that particular writing. So like we found a typeface to use that was, it had a normal, let's just say, handwriting, and then there was an element where she was a little bit more crazed, she's a little bit more rushed. It's like got a just extra to it. It's a little bit more crazy. So there's that element too, where she might be writing in the similar style as a different color, but then you can see that change as well with that slight tweak of that particular typeface and how that looked.
Did you have any kind of influences or touchstones that you used while making this book?
I would say the books that you suggested probably were to look at for some inspiration were some of those influences. Just in general, I did a lot of looking at other people's handwriting too to make sure that it looked organic or that we were approaching it organically because you're using technology to put together something that's supposed to look organic, and that's inherently opposite, right? Um, so for me, that was kind of something I did. I looked at different, the way I write, the way people in my life write, the way that, you just kind of look at, on the internet for different things or that kind of stuff. So I would say that was a big part of it. The books that you suggested, which was House of Leaves was one of them. There's a couple others. And yeah, that was most of it.
And I know that Xandra, my co-writer, and we also had certain little pet projects or hang-ups, certain things like certain colors or layouts or types or ideas that I think we drove you crazy with too.
Yes, you guys did. Well, actually, I don't think you drove me crazy. I think that helped a lot. You guys had a lot of, I guess you could say preconceived ideas for certain sections. Like, I really want this section, i.e., with the second journal, to look like a journal or something where these two people are handing back pages back and forth. Or Xandra with the food and merch section, what really wanted it to look kind of have a 60s vibe to it. And she had some type of fonts and colors and things that she really liked, that she wanted to be a part of that to make that look the way that it does and how it flowed. So for those pieces, I kind of just took from what you guys were looking for and found a way to bring that to the page, more than my own, my own thing.
I think some of my favorite conversations with you, you're basically, no, Mark, reality doesn't work that way. We can't make the page do that. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. But that's a good thing. Like you got to have like a lot of different ideas and then what actually works and how does it
Mhm.
actually flow on the page, matters. So I think that's a good thing.